Ibrahim Traoré, a name that, just a few years ago, was barely known outside of Burkina Faso. And yet today, this young captain has become one of the most talked-about leaders on the entire continent. From defying global powers to inspiring a new vision of African independence, Traoré's rise has shocked the world. Now, rumors are swirling. Whispers that he could be nominated for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. If that's true, it wouldn't just be a personal victory for him. It would mark a turning point for Africa, for the West, and for the balance of global politics itself. What does it mean when a leader once dismissed as too young and too radical suddenly stands on the world stage as a symbol of peace? And what would it mean for the people of Africa and the future of every nation watching closely? This story could change how you see world power forever. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because you won't want to miss the journey we're about to take. Reports are spreading like wildfire across African media outlets, social platforms, and even whispered conversations in diplomatic halls. Ibrahim Traoré's name may be on the list for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. For many outside Africa, this sounds almost unbelievable. How can a man who rose to power through a military transition, a captain, not a career politician, be placed alongside giants like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., or even Barack Obama? Yet for millions of Africans, this moment feels less like a surprise and more like long overdue recognition. For decades, Africa's struggles, sacrifices, and victories have been ignored by global institutions. Suddenly, the name of a 36-year-old leader from Burkina Faso is echoing in the same breath as one of the most prestigious awards in the world. To many Africans, it feels like justice finally knocking at their door, the recognition of a continent that has fought, bled, and resisted for generations. To others, it is proof that a new order is emerging, one that challenges the dominance of Western narratives. The Nobel Peace Prize is not just a medal or a ceremonial handshake. It is a global stage, the kind that forces even the most powerful nations to stop and listen. Whoever receives this award instantly gains a megaphone that the whole world cannot ignore. If Ibrahim Traoré's name is truly nominated, then his words, his policies, and his vision will echo far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Think about it. Africa's demand for independence, its fight against neo-colonial exploitation, and its calls for dignity have often been silenced or brushed aside by Western powers. But if Traoré steps onto that stage, the conversation shifts. Suddenly, Africa is not the background of history, but the front page. Suddenly, Western leaders, corporations, and institutions have to respond. This is why the possibility of Traoré's nomination matters globally. It's not just about him. It's about a continent's voice becoming too loud, too strong, and too unified to be ignored any longer. It's about reshaping the global order, one recognition at a time. Ibrahim Traoré is not an ordinary leader. At just 36 years old, he is one of the youngest heads of state in the entire world. In an era where leaders are often old, tired, and deeply entrenched in political games, Traoré represents something new, the boldness and courage of Africa's young generation rising to reclaim its future. If he is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, he would not only be one of the youngest leaders to ever receive such recognition, but also one of the few who rose to power from the ranks of the military, not the elite political classes. That makes his story different. It makes his rise symbolic. A soldier who put down his rifle to pick up the torch of sovereignty. His youth gives his journey even more weight. Millions of young Africans see themselves in him. They see someone who is not waiting for permission from the West, not begging for approval from old systems, but instead demanding respect with conviction. If Traoré's name is truly on the Nobel list, it signals something historic, that a new generation is not only entering the world stage, but also rewriting its rules. To understand why Traoré's possible nomination resonates so deeply, you must first understand the burden of his nation. Burkina Faso has carried decades of suffering. It has been battered by terrorism, poverty, political instability, and exploitation at the hands of foreign powers. Every family in the country has felt the weight of violence, uncertainty, or hunger in some way. When Traoré took power, he did not inherit a system of prosperity. He inherited a broken state, a bleeding nation, and a people desperate for dignity. And yet, instead of bowing to foreign pressure or becoming another puppet leader, he stood his ground. His refusal to let Western countries dictate Burkina Faso's future has transformed him into a symbol of resistance, not only for his own people, but for Africans across the continent. This is why a Nobel nomination is not just about Ibrahim Traoré as an individual. It's about Burkina Faso finally being recognized for its resilience. It's about giving a face to the suffering, the hope, and the determination of millions who have been ignored for too long. Traoré carries not just his own name, but the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Yet with all the excitement and pride, there is a shadow of doubt. The Nobel Peace Prize, as prestigious as it is, has always been a double-edged sword. Critics argue that it is not always about peace or justice, but about politics. They ask, if Ibrahim Traoré is nominated, is it because the world genuinely respects his bold fight for African sovereignty? Or is it a Western attempt to neutralize him, to soften his radical independence stance by wrapping him in the language of peace? History gives us plenty of examples. Nobel Prizes have often gone to figures who later sparked controversy or who were awarded not for what they had achieved, but for what global powers wanted them to represent. Could Traoré's potential nomination be another case of symbolism over substance? Could it be used to pressure him into compromise, to tame his fiery speeches against colonialism, to dilute his radical push for African unity? This question has already ignited fierce debate across Africa. Some say it would be a victory, recognition that Africa's fight can no longer be ignored. Others warn that it could be a trap, a way of silencing a revolutionary by placing him in a cage made of gold. Think back to 1993, when Nelson Mandela walked to the stage to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for ending apartheid, a global acknowledgement of Africa's triumph. Think about 2009, when Barack Obama received the prize for his vision of hope, even before his policies had taken shape. Now imagine Ibrahim Traoré's name in that same league. Mandela symbolized reconciliation. Obama symbolized hope. Could Traoré symbolize sovereignty? Could a soldier-turned-leader who rejects foreign domination join the same ranks as these figures? For many Africans, that question alone is electrifying. Whether or not the Nobel Committee chooses him, for millions of Africans, the decision is already made. Ibrahim Traoré is their peace champion. Why? Because in Africa, peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is the ability to farm your land without foreign companies stealing it. Peace is raising your children without drones flying overhead. Peace is deciding your own destiny without external interference. For Africans, Traoré's defiance against colonial structures represents peace in its truest sense. To them, every speech he gives and every action he takes is already worthy of the world's highest recognition. But not everyone agrees. Western media often describes Traoré as controversial, radical, or even dangerous. To them, he is not a peacemaker but a disruptor. Yet within Africa, his name is spoken with pride, liberator, protector, son of the soil. This clash of narratives makes the Nobel buzz even more explosive. Would a nomination silence Western critics, forcing them to take him seriously? Or would it intensify the attacks, painting him as an even bigger threat to their interests? Either way, the world is watching. From the streets of Bamako in Mali to the villages of Niger, chants of Traoré's name echo through crowds of young Africans. He has become more than Burkina Faso's leader. He is a symbol of Pan-Africanism. A Nobel nomination wouldn't just be for one man or one country. It would be a recognition of an entire continent's rising generation determined to reclaim its dignity. For the first time in decades, young Africans feel that someone is not just speaking for them, but fighting for them. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, with over 60% of its population under the age of 25. This generation is impatient, frustrated, and hungry for change. They see in Ibrahim Traoré a mirror of themselves, bold, unafraid, and unwilling to wait another 50 years for freedom. If the Nobel Committee recognizes Traoré, the message to Africa's youth will be clear. Your voice matters, your struggle matters, and your dreams are not invisible. That signal alone could spark a wave of confidence among millions of young Africans. Unlike many leaders before him, who begged for foreign troops and accepted endless military bases on African soil, Traoré chose a different path. He rejected dependency. He strengthened Burkina Faso's local defense forces, forged regional alliances with Mali and Niger, and sought African-led solutions to terrorism in the Sahel. To his supporters, this is real peace. Peace built not on foreign soldiers patrolling African streets, but on Africans protecting their own land. For the Nobel Committee, this fight against terrorism without becoming a pawn of Western armies could be one of his strongest credentials. Perhaps Traoré's boldest move was his complete break from France, the former colonial master. He ordered the withdrawal of French troops, reclaimed control over Burkina Faso's gold and land, and demanded respect for African sovereignty. For the West, these actions look like confrontation. But for Africans, they are liberation. To them, true peace cannot exist without independence. And so, every decision Traoré made to cut colonial chains adds another reason why some see him as a Nobel-worthy figure. But here lies the tension. The Nobel Prize is awarded in Norway within Western institutions. Would they allow a fiery anti-colonial figure like Traoré to stand on their stage and speak truths that threaten their system? Or would the voices of millions of Africans now, louder than ever, make him impossible to ignore? The committee faces a dilemma. Do they cling to tradition, or do they recognize the winds of change blowing from Africa? If Ibrahim Traoré is nominated, it won't just be a personal achievement. It will be a collective victory. Millions of Africans will see it as validation, proof that their pain and struggle are not invisible to the world. It could ignite pride, unity, and renewed hope across the continent. The symbolism is immense. Africa would no longer be recognized as a land of poverty and conflict, but as a continent producing leaders worthy of the world's highest peace stage. Yet the criticisms remain sharp. Traoré rose to power through a coup, and for many that contradicts the very spirit of peace. His military background, his fiery speeches, and his uncompromising stance are used against him by detractors who argue that Nobel laureates should embody dialogue, not force. This question, can a coup-born leader be a peace icon, remains one of the biggest obstacles to his candidacy. But Traoré's influence is not limited to Africa. Across Europe, African diaspora communities rally behind him. In Latin America, activists fighting against imperialism see him as a kindred spirit. In Asia, his rejection of Western dominance resonates with movements for sovereignty. What makes him powerful is not just his leadership in Burkina Faso, but his message of global justice, a message that resonates across continents tired of exploitation. On the streets of Ouagadougou, young men and women carry posters of Traoré, chanting his name as if he were more than a president, as if he were family. To them, he has restored something priceless: pride. They say peace begins with dignity, and dignity begins when leaders refuse to bow to outsiders. For Burkina Faso's youth, Traoré is already a Nobel figure, whether the committee recognizes him or not. We cannot ignore history. The Nobel Peace Prize has always been political. Barack Obama received it at the start of his presidency, before he had proven anything. Aung San Suu Kyi won it, only to later be accused of remaining silent on atrocities in her country. This is why Traoré's possible nomination is controversial. Is it recognition of genuine leadership or another case of symbolism and manipulation? The answer may depend on how Africa itself claims the narrative. If the African Union steps in and officially supports Traoré's candidacy, the momentum could become unstoppable. For the first time, Africa would be united in pushing one of its own onto the world stage. Such a move would not just strengthen Traoré's chances. It would mark a historic moment, a continent asserting its power to shape global recognition instead of waiting for outsiders to define its heroes. What makes this story even more fascinating is Traoré's personal stance. He has never campaigned for awards, never asked for recognition. Over and over he reminds the world, this struggle is not about me, but about my people. This humility only strengthens his image. Unlike many leaders who chase titles and trophies, Traoré frames his legacy around his people's freedom, not his personal glory. And paradoxically, that may be the very reason why the world is paying attention. Western powers may not necessarily fear Traoré's military capabilities. His army alone may not be enough to intimidate global powers, but what terrifies them is what he represents. Symbolism has always been a more potent weapon than guns or tanks in the modern political arena. If Traoré were to receive a Nobel Prize, it would be a global acknowledgement that his ideas, his reforms, and his vision carry legitimacy. Suddenly, no media campaign, no editorial attack, no smear in Western newspapers could erase the credibility such an award confers. In essence, the Nobel Prize is more than just a medal. It is a shield and a megaphone at once. For Burkina Faso, and for Traoré himself, this symbolism could shift the balance of power. International recognition would signal that his leadership is not merely tolerated but respected, and that respect cannot easily be undermined by external narratives. This is why Western diplomats, analysts, and policymakers may quietly dread the prospect of Traoré being associated with such global prestige. It is a fear of ideas, influence, and the story of resistance, not just the reality of his army. Beyond symbolism, the Nobel Prize can act as a tangible shield against political and military attacks. Leaders who gain global recognition are harder to target without facing international backlash. If Traoré holds a Nobel medal, it's no longer just Burkina Faso that matters. The eyes of the world are on him. This recognition can deter covert foreign interventions or economic pressure campaigns that aim to destabilize his administration. Historically, Nobel laureates have enjoyed this sort of protective aura. Consider how figures like Aung San Suu Kyi or Nelson Mandela benefited from international attention, making it politically costly for opponents to act against them openly. In Traoré's case, the award could serve as a deterrent, ensuring that foreign powers must think twice before attempting to undermine Burkina Faso. It's not just personal prestige, it's a strategic lever that strengthens national sovereignty. Recognition on this scale could transform Traoré from a regional reformer into a global political figure whose ideas and actions demand respect. Despite his rising influence, not all Africans view Traoré favorably. Within Burkina Faso and across the continent, critics question the pace and intensity of his reforms. Some argue that his strategies are too radical, too disruptive, and could jeopardize the fragile economic stability of his country. Others fear that aligning too closely with anti-Western ideologies may isolate Burkina Faso from international trade and aid networks that remain crucial for development. These dissenting voices are likely to grow louder if a Nobel nomination comes into play. To some, the idea of a global award legitimizing a controversial domestic agenda seems premature. Yet this tension highlights a broader debate within Africa. How should leaders balance internal reforms, international perception, and the long-term interests of their nations? Traoré's challenge, therefore, is not only to navigate foreign scrutiny, but also to maintain credibility and trust among his own people, where skepticism can be just as dangerous as opposition abroad. Traoré is not operating in isolation. Across West Africa, leaders in Mali, Niger, and Guinea have already begun forming informal alliances with Burkina Faso, sharing similar visions of sovereignty and resistance against external domination. A Nobel nomination for one leader within this network could have a ripple effect, strengthening these regional alliances and giving them legitimacy on the world stage. International observers would have to acknowledge that these countries are no longer isolated actors. They are part of a growing bloc with shared political goals. This recognition could embolden their policies, increase diplomatic leverage, and even foster economic cooperation among them. For ordinary citizens, this is not merely about geopolitics. It's about seeing a new model of African leadership emerge, one that values self-determination and regional solidarity over dependency on Western powers. Traoré's prominence could serve as a unifying symbol, rallying nations with similar aspirations toward a collective Pan-African vision. While international awards like the Nobel carry enormous prestige, Africans may increasingly seek to define their own standards of recognition. Even if Traoré never receives the Nobel, Pan-African thinkers and political leaders are already discussing alternative forms of acknowledgement, what some are calling a People's Peace Prize. This concept emphasizes validation from the people who are directly impacted by a leader's policies rather than committees situated thousands of miles away. In a sense, grassroots recognition can be even more powerful than international awards because it reflects genuine support and legitimacy within the continent. Such an African-driven accolade could redefine what it means to be a celebrated leader, shifting the focus from Western approval to internal accountability and respect. For Traoré, this represents another path to lasting influence, one that does not depend on foreign validation but is grounded in the admiration and trust of Africans themselves. In the long run, this may be the most enduring legacy of all. If the Nobel Committee officially confirms Traoré's candidacy, brace yourself for an unprecedented storm of media coverage, a battle of narratives that could dominate headlines worldwide. Western media outlets are likely to dissect every decision he has made, emphasizing controversies, missteps, or allegations, framing them in ways that question his suitability for such a prestigious honor. In contrast, African and Pan-African media will highlight his reforms, his courage, and the tangible progress he has made in Burkina Faso, presenting him as a visionary leader standing up to centuries of external interference. Social media platforms will become a battleground as well, with hashtags trending, debates flaring, and memes shaping perceptions in real time. The world will witness a clash of narratives, one attempting to undermine, the other to celebrate. In this media war, the prize is not just the Nobel itself, but control over the story that defines Traoré's legacy in the eyes of global audiences. A Nobel nomination for Traoré would not only resonate across Africa, it would ripple around the globe. Leaders in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East who resist Western political or economic pressure would instantly recognize him as a symbol of defiance and strategic independence. His nomination could embolden movements and governments seeking to assert sovereignty and chart paths independent of Western influence. Consider countries like Venezuela, Iran, or even regional movements in Southeast Asia. For them, Traoré would represent a shared vision that small nations can challenge global powers without compromising dignity or self-determination. His recognition would inspire a network of solidarity, connecting leaders and activists who see their struggles mirrored in his. In effect, the Nobel could transform him from a national leader into a global figurehead for resistance and strategic autonomy, bridging continents through shared ideals of courage and resilience. Picture this: Traoré standing in Oslo, holding the medal, declaring Africa's right to freedom. That moment alone would shift global consciousness, even if he never wins the actual prize. History tells us great leaders who challenge the system often face danger. A Nobel spotlight could protect him or put a bigger target on his back. The risk cannot be ignored. So is Ibrahim Traoré really nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 2025? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, his name is already written in the hearts of millions. And sometimes, that is the greatest prize of all. If you want to stay updated on this story and never miss the latest breakthroughs in African politics and global leadership, make sure to hit that subscribe button now, because the next chapter is just around the corner and you'll want to see it first.